Welcome to the very first episode of Between Two Friends. On this episode, we are going to talk a bit about ourselves, our backgrounds, how this podcast came to be, the topics we plan to cover, and the methodology that we'll be using to tackle these topics. But most importantly, why you should be listening to this podcast series. To get things kicked off, I'd like to invite Ravi to introduce himself briefly.
Thank you, Kapil. I have been in the wireless industry for about 15 plus years. Very lucky to have worked in different roles from engineering to marketing, product strategy, product management. Basically, I love to work with new technologies and build products. And I'm also very active in the local Seattle startup ecosystem. I also happened to get my MBA from UC Berkeley a couple of years ago. And you can follow me on Twitter at Vayuvegula. I also write a couple of Medium articles. You could also follow me over there at Ravi Vayuvegula.
And we'll include this in our show notes as well.
Yeah.
All right, so maybe a bit about myself. This is Kapil. I'm calling in from Shanghai, where I've been with Intel for the past 10 years in various tech and management roles. Currently, I'm the Director of Innovation for China, and I run GrowthX, a startup corporate accelerator. Prior to Intel, I was a product design manager at Apple, working on things like iPod, iPad, the MacBooks, and such. I was the co-creator of the very first multi-touch screen at Apple that went into iPhone and later on all other touch-enabled devices. I advise and mentor startups either directly or through accelerators like Chinaccelerator, XNode, Startup Bootcamp, and many other programs. I also lead Singularity University's China Shanghai chapter. And like Ravi, I grew up in Goa and then went on to get my master's in engineering from Stanford. And then after working at Apple, I found myself back in Asia, and I've been living in Shanghai for the past 15 years. You can find me on LinkedIn /in/KAPILKANE. I also have a Twitter handle. It's again KAPILKANE. Now that we got our intros out of the way, we can discuss a bit about how this podcast came to be. And Ravi and I, we've been friends for over 30 years now. We talk regularly. And maybe I can have Ravi to talk a bit about where does this idea of podcast come into
Yeah.
our minds?
Yeah. So when you say regularly, did you realize, Kapil, that we have been talking for last 14 years since you went to Shanghai? And that's about 720 weeks. And I just sort of like did a rough math. It comes out to be like, 300 to 400 hours that we have been speaking on different topics.
Wow.
Yeah. We cover things like technology. We talk a lot about diet and exercise, well-being, who's the latest guru to follow. And this huge number of topics that we talk about, what I realized is the essence of these topics is always we are trying to figure out, hey, how much of this is fiction? How much of this is reality? Right? We are always trying to figure out, is there an opportunity in machine learning? Is there opportunity in product for wearables? And what I realized is it was just not the two of us, right, who were talking about these topics and figuring out where is the opportunity, what is fiction, what is reality. I saw a lot of my colleagues from office, my senior management, also grappling with the same issues. So one thing was very clear. There is a lot of confusion about major topics like, let's say, quantum computing, gene editing, machine learning, the big topics which impact humanity.
Yeah, that's true. That's like, I think that we are in an age where there's overload of information.
Yeah.
There are two things, One thing also I noticed is lots of headlines, which make you think one way, but when you actually go read through it, the story is completely different. And the second thing is, so how do you really separate signal from the noise? That's also one of the issues I grapple with. And another thing is also, I read it this morning. It says opinion is the lowest form of knowledge.
Yeah.
And we are bombarded with opinions on Twitter, on news feeds, on social media. So it makes things even worse. And so I think, at least even for me, I want to really get to the bottom of things, really get to understand the truth about a topic, and form an informed point of view through
Yeah.
research and rigor, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's also one of the things we discussed on our check-ins in the recent past.
Yeah. And the only way out, to be honest, is just not quite reading quite a lot, but there needs to be some
Mm-hmm.
sort of like a thoughtful approach, a
Mm.
systematic approach, a lot of discussion with, other people in the same field as the topic of discussion. And
Mm.
only through going through this whole process, a systematic process, can you go to the second order level of thinking. The real knowledge comes only if there is a concerted effort, a thoughtful approach, and speaking to experts.
Mm. And also, it helps if you discuss things out between two friends rather
Definitely.
than rather than trying to go on your own, because we are all biased, and it's good to keep each other honest.
Yeah. And plus
Yeah.
also one more advantage is just because of our professions that we have been in technology, and we have also a good network, specifically people who are in the technology industry, and we have leveraged a lot of them to help us better our understanding of different topics. So that is something definitely we can share with our audience.
Mm.
Also, another reason for this podcast is to get feedback from the audience as to uh, if, did they what do they think of our insights, or if they have their own insights, we would love to incorporate those.
Mm.
And finally, this podcast is also a sort of like a legacy to our family and friends and colleagues, because we are able to share the knowledge that we have gained. I'm pretty sure that it will resonate with a lot of people. And also,
Mm.
it gives a small window into the way we think about topics and what matters to us and who we are.
Yeah, and I think we are at a stage where, especially, for me, I have a young 5-year-old son. I have nephews and nieces who are entering the workforce, and they have very similar questions. What should I be doing? They have some idea, or in some cases a misconception about what is AI, or
Yeah.
or what is the climate change. And it would be very good to refer them to these topics we discuss on podcasts, so at least they can have a first-hand view of what these topics are from someone in their family, or someone they trust, or some of their friends. So I think in that way we could also be doing service to our younger generation, like just in our close family and friends as well. And if others find this interesting, I think that's a bonus.
Yeah, agree. And another way I'm viewing it as is like it's like a small time capsule, because we come in with some hypothesis and some understanding of the topics we are going to talk about, but over time I'm hoping that as we learn more, that maybe our opinion changes, or maybe we figure out that okay, our opinion was correct. But this podcast and this recording will also show us like, hey, this is how you evolved in your thinking over time.
Yeah, and it would be really cool if we are able to disprove a lot of hypotheses that we came in with. And that
Yeah.
would be a huge bonus, right? For
Yeah.
example, let's say I was completely against cryptocurrency, blockchain, Bitcoin. Not against, but I really didn't understand why this concept is everyone is jumping into this area. But recently I opened up my mind, and right now I'm working with an accelerator to mentor their startups who are building Web 3.0 application on top of blockchain. Um, and I hope that by the time we discuss this blockchain in our podcast, I would have a different set of experiences and real data to bring to that topic, rather than my original theory that all this is wasteful.
Yeah, that's interesting, because I had a complete opposite reaction when I was working in machine learning.
Hmm?
I was like super gung-ho. I thought it is like, AI is here and we are pretty close to solving a lot of problems. But then my journey over the last couple of years has been like up and down, where I see where AI has worked, where AI is not working. So it's a lot of disappointment, but some few winners. But that's what we would love to talk over our next couple of episodes.
And nothing beats hands-on experience with any technology, right? For example, remember when we started this podcast, we discovered this really cool program, Descript, right? Which can transcribe your podcast, and it can dub your voice by simply typing the words onto a document. But although it sounds amazing, it works in certain cases, but it doesn't work in many cases.
Yeah.
So there are like physical, there are like limitations of certain technologies. It sounds great on paper, great sound bites, and you can make it work by brute force, by doing a lot of training. But then, like when you're actually in practically using it, it may not be. It may only work for very small segment of the population.
Yeah.
Right. So
Yeah.
things are promising, but you need to really be out there using these technologies to really form an opinion.
Yeah. Agree. That brings us to the topics that we might be talking about. Basically, like we already started saying, like, hey, AI is something of interest to us. You have people like Andrew Ng, one of the forefront of AI researchers, also say things like it's difficult to think of a major industry which is not going to be transformed by AI. So literally, like he's on stage and he's saying like, I cannot think of a single industry where AI will not transform it. And this is coming from somebody who's a pioneer in setting up AI systems. He's a Stanford professor, and I take his opinions and views very seriously. But at the same time, you have Elon Musk and Peter Thiel saying like, you know what, AI is too dangerous. So I feel like this is going to be a very interesting topic that we shall be discussing. On the same lines, you have things like climate change. You might have been reading in the newspaper things like Paris Agreement. You have the US pulling out of Paris Agreement, and then within 4 years again coming back to Paris Agreement. What is it, and why is it that important? So one interesting fact about Paris Agreement, which is about climate change, is literally the entire world has signed it. So like 195 countries. I think there are just a couple of countries which have not signed it. So that is pretty unique in this world, that so many countries have come together. But of course, let's see. You can see that the United States changing its opinion within 4 years itself shows you like how drastically the opinions differ.
Yeah.
That not everybody's on the same page. So that's another topic we will be like discussing.
Yeah, so I think on this topic of climate change, I've been also recently reading some books from economists, and they're talking about the effectiveness of the policies, especially the Paris Agreement, and whether it's some money well spent or not. I think we can discuss all of this. I'm very excited to talk about climate change because, a lot of times you have these headlines like the hurricane going through Florida, killing so many people, so much devastation. But when you look at the meteorological data, it shows that we have less number of hurricanes in the US than the past. The reason there is more devastation is that there are like more people living in the path of the hurricanes now than before, right?
Yeah.
So things like that, I think when we hear just the headlines, you're like, wow, this is like, getting really worse. But then when you look at the second order, when you start questioning why is it getting worse, is it the force of the hurricane getting worse, are the numbers getting worse, or what? And then you start to discover the realities. I'm not saying climate change is not real, but how to fix it, how to approach that solution. There might be many different solutions, and I think that's what I think maybe we could discuss on this episode, right?
Yeah. Agree. And there's one another very interesting topic which we briefly talked about, especially when we talk about longevity of humans or how medicine could change. And gene editing is going to play a big part in the future. So it'll be
Mm-hmm.
super interesting to actually dive deeper and
Mm-hmm.
figure out, hey, what does gene editing really mean? What is this CRISPR technologies? Will it really change lives? And if it does, is it going to cause inequality? Or maybe it could even cause like political tensions where one country is pitted against the other. And those are the kind of implications that gene editing could actually bring to the table.
Mm. It's also, I think, very similar like the topic of AI, where there are lots of possibilities. And one of the initial possibilities is, I think the first step, right, is human genome sequencing. Okay, that's like basically digitizing human genome. And once you digitize, then you look at how each person's genome is different than the reference genome. What are the mutations? Based on that, one of the application is targeted medicine to cure cancers and stuff like that. We are still struggling with that. There have been lots of studies. There are some limited successes, but it's not as we have not made enough advancement as we would have liked. That's one thing. Gene editing is also a very nascent field and it could go many different ways. But I do believe that digitizing human genome and manipulating that data is going to be uh, very, very important topics going forward.
Yeah. And so moving away from this science and technology, we have on the other side, we often talk about philosophy. So we talk about Stoic philosophers like
Mm-hmm.
Seneca, Marcus Aurelius. And I still remember my first introduction to Marcus Aurelius was when I was reading his essays. And I did not
Mm-hmm.
know about this person. And I thought this is some person who wrote an article just maybe a month or 2 months ago, because he was
Mm.
talking about lifestyle which I was identifying with, and the same kind of problems that I had. And I was like, wow, this is super current. And when I realized that this was written 2000 years ago, I was like blown away. And I said, okay, let me dig a little bit deeper. And turns out that you also independently have heard of these Stoic philosophers.
Yeah, so I listened to Tim Ferriss, and he's a huge fan of Seneca. He, in fact, published an audiobook on letters from Seneca.
Mm,
Right? Although I have not read the book or listened to the book, but he keeps talking about that Stoic philosophy, and I'd love to dive deeper into this topic. And I think that this podcast we have going, it will also help us or force us to dive deeper into topics that we would not have usually dive deeper on our own. So
yeah.
that's also exciting. Yeah, because
Uh,
typically we will try to do more research into things we like, not necessarily things that are important or things that we need to master to to really make sense of the world around us.
Yeah, fair enough. But these topics are deep, and I'm thinking
Mm,
we do an episode maybe monthly.
mm.
And as we get better at doing our research and getting the cadence faster, maybe we could do short episodes with less than a month kind of gap. But mostly we are looking at doing one episode per month.
Yeah, so I think we could talk a bit about how we are going to approach our research, the methodology, right? Let's say since we are talking about AI, right? So the first topic of AI, the way we are going to tackle these topics is we are first of all we are going to select topics that are important right now, which has a huge consequences as well as big potential, so that it has to be a timely topic with large potential and huge consequences. And then once we pick this topic, and we have discussed a few of them now, right? Like AI, climate change, philosophy, well-being. And what we'll do is we'll talk about the pet peeves we have with this topic. We'll bring together our personal experiences and connection with this topic. We'll look at the current examples, what is being talked about in the media, what people are tweeting about this. We look at the historical precedents of this topic and if there are any similarities to something that happened in history, so that we can get a different kind of a perspective. Uh, and we'll look at the research, scientific research around this topic. The people who are expert in this field that we could follow. We'll look at the organizations that are authoritative on this topic. And we put all of this together. We will divide and conquer our research work. We go back, we'll spend a week or two doing this research, and then come back with our findings, and we discuss this on our podcast.
Yeah.
It's through the debate and through dialogue that we want to form a clear, informed point of view on these topics.
Yeah.
So that's the plan.
I agree. And one more thing also, going into research, typically
Mm-hmm.
we go in with forming a hypothesis. And I think Charles Darwin has said this well, and he used it a lot when he was coming up with his origin of species theory. It's called disconfirming evidence, looking for disconfirming evidence. So a strong point to our research would be like, not look for research which is going to confirm our opinions, but rather look for evidence which is going to say, no, your opinion is wrong.
Yeah, that's a good way. We need to look at both sides, ones that reinforce that hypothesis and ones that disprove that hypothesis, right?
Yeah.
And this is, I think this is also what we do on a regular basis in my day-to-day work, where I work with the startups to create, let's say, a business model, and that business model is full of hypotheses, lots of assumptions. And then we go and look at the biggest assumptions, which, if were wrong, would completely take your business model apart.
Yeah.
And then we create tests to test those critical hypotheses. And our goal is to either prove or disprove those hypotheses.
Yeah.
And either way, whether it's the hypothesis is wrong or it holds, it's a good result, right?
Yeah.
So I think, and I think that's the same approach we are trying to use on this podcast to tackle all these topics.
Yeah. I completely agree.
So I think now that we have our backgrounds, our methodologies, our topics, I think I think what we could do is maybe we can list down a few that we have on our radar. For example, we have AI, climate change, we have well-being, we have meaning of life, we have bioengineering, media and influencers and how they change or how they drive the narrative. We have a topic on blockchain, quantum computing, Stoic philosophy, and like you said, we plan to tackle a topic per month. If your listeners, you want a particular topic to be tackled, please tweet us at Between Two Friends. If you have any comments as well or suggestions, also tweet us there. I think that's the end, I think, of this episode, Ravi. Do you have anything else to say?
No, that's about it. So, I'm really looking forward to hearing from our audience. So send in our tweets and suggestions, as Kapil said. Thanks for listening. And I'm super excited for the next episode. What about you, Kapil?
Absolutely. And all the show links to our Twitter, to our LinkedIn, our website will be in the show notes. So thanks again for listening, and see you on the next episode.